This is KTN News.
Welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, this is Bottomline Africa right here on KTN News. And let's cross over now to Botswana, where African ministers in charge of conservation are expected in Gaborone in Botswana this week to take stock of an agreed transformative platform for achieving sustainable development in Africa. Now, the forum will reinforce sustainability and natural capital as the centerpiece of economic planning and development across member states that include Botswana, Gabon, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Madagascar, Mozambique, Namibia, Rwanda, South Africa, Tanzania, as well as Uganda. Now, the forum, to be opened by Botswana's President Ian Khama, also marks the 5-year anniversary of the GDSA. The forum is inspired by the recognition of the opportunities, risks and rewards that come with increased investment and commitment to sustainable management of Africa's rich natural capital. And that story from Botswana takes us straight to a studio discussion tonight. Once again, let me reintroduce our guest in studio. We have Michael O'Brien Onyeka, who is the Senior Vice President, Africa Field Division at Conservation International. We also have Mr. Jim Nyamu, who is an elephant research scientist and activist. We also have Vincent Ontita, who is an Education and Outreach Manager, Wildlife Direct Kenya. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well.
You're welcome. Let me begin with you, O'Brien. Actually, you prefer to be called Onyeka. Let me begin with you. And when people talk about conservation, you know, everyone imagines or thinks about, you know, elephants or wildlife and wildlife protection. Can you, for a start, can you please demystify or explain to us what conservation is all about?
It's, thank you very much for that. I think whilst elephants are, of course, important and very critical to our ecosystem, the wider view of conservation is about the fresh water we rely on, the rich soils we rely on for our food security, the fish that comes from the oceans, which wouldn't happen if the mangroves are dead, because the mangroves are the breeding grounds for fish. And so the entire ecosystem provides critical services that we take for granted, unfortunately. And part of the work of Conservation International and many other conservation organizations is to educate and highlight the importance of our vast natural wealth, and that if we place the protection and sustaining of our natural capital at the center of our development, we will go a lot further in the pathway of development in Africa.
Well said, Onyeka. Of course, there's need to protect what you refer to as our natural capital. Now, Vincent, this is where to bring you in, and people have been talking about, you know, wildlife protection, and I believe you deal with elephants. Where are we as a continent when it comes to wildlife protection, and in particular elephants, and how is issues to do with ivory trade in the continent?
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here once again. And one, if you look at the current status where we are in terms of the population of elephants, this is from the African Elephant Database. We're talking of the 2016 data collected between 2013 and 15. Kenya started at 22,000 elephants. And this is a decline from the last census, which was done by the African Elephant Database. But the poaching in Kenya has significantly reduced, and we have this record from the Kenya Wildlife Service and also from the neighboring group ranches. And one thing that you learned is because of there has been a lot of effort from the Kenya government by enacting new laws, and also by the fact that the Kenya Wildlife Service or the conservation were given more support by the national government by ensuring that the elephant are considered in the national security. However, the issues of conservation are still considered risk because of many things. We have seen human-wildlife conflict is taking now a big role in this country. And this is because of a couple of challenges that includes the climate change. We've seen in the Savo where we are losing so many elephants. And we have also seen in the Laikipia whereby we've lost so many elephants. This is not poaching. But again, there are other emerging issues like a conflict over resources, and this would be worse than even the poaching.
Well said, Vincent. We're going to go shortly to issues to do with, human-wildlife conflict. But Jim, if you look at latest statistics, it indicates that about 27,000 elephants are being killed every year in the continent. This is a very worrying figure. And what are conservationists doing exactly?
What is happening in Africa and what an example the Kenya experience is the same as what Uganda, Tanzania is experiencing. Remember, it's only in West Africa where we have the forested elephants. But in across South Africa, Central and East Africa, we have the savanna elephants that experience the same thing. What I mean the same thing is that most of them are within the pastoral areas where communities have trying to earn their living by doing farming. We've seen the population of elephants in Africa coming down. Some countries have lost their elephant entirely. And this is because of two things, the poaching and also the human conflict, which is taking away so many animals. Because we have seen most of communities reiterating and killing animals because they think that they have no use, or they think they may be menace to them, and for that case, there is no need for them having those elephants within themselves.
Yes, and I think this is why I want to bring Jim into this conversation. Jim, I hope you can hear me. Actually, that question I posted to you, unfortunately you didn't hear, I believe. But if you look at the Vincent, actually, if you look at the trend right now, actually the numbers from the latest statistics indicate that 27,000 elephants are being killed every year. What is your view on that? Because this is a very worrying number.
It saddens me, especially as a young person. Every 15 minutes we lose an elephant in Africa. That really, it saddens, especially to the younger generation. We will not be able to see these magnificent animals there, because we need to come together, all the stakeholders, government, NGOs, working together and including the younger generation in this to ensure that the African endangered species endures forever.
Now, Onyanka, speaking about government, we all know that, African governments, African countries are all, they want to be industrialized, they want to be urbanized, everyone is talking about development. And it seems that, conservationists and conservation efforts are being brushed aside and they're being left by the wayside. What are the risks?
The risk of not doing the right thing is extremely high. The fact of the matter, however you look at it from political security perspective or economic security perspective, it is in our collective enlightened interest to sustain and ensure prosperity for critical ecosystems on which we rely on. Remember that people need nature in order to thrive. Nature doesn't need people. But we do take nature for granted. If you look at, say, a seemingly insignificant part of southeastern Kenya, Chulu Hills, for example, semi-arid area, but has cloud forests that generate water. That water feeds Savo East and West. Now, those are big ecotourism sites. And then, more significantly, the water from Chulu Hills supplies 35% of the water that goes to Mombasa, second largest city in Kenya, nearly 2 million people or 1.5 million people. Now, if that critical water tower disappears, what is the economic cost or the opportunity cost of resupplying Mombasa 35% of its fresh water? But for a fraction of that cost, you can right now plough that money a fraction of that into the communities in and around Chulu Hills so that they don't cut the forest. And I wanted to use this to touch on what we are talking about elephant. We need to find a way to demystify the notion of preservation of critical species and our critical ecosystems. We need to translate them into bread and butter issues. Because the fact of the matter is that the historical aspect of park protected areas comes from the 1890 notion that was developed in the US, where the notion was you find a critical ecosystem, you keep everything in and everybody out. And that doesn't work in Africa, because if you ask the average local Kenyan, what's the benefit they are getting from elephant? Of course, there are lots of benefits, but they don't know that.
Yes.
So until we begin to ensure that the preservation of ecosystems bring real dividends to people on the ground, that's what I call the bread and butter economics, then that's only when they can begin to be the champions of that. And it's important that we do that, because we are fastly losing our species. You know, this planet has lost close to 90% of its biodiversity. Liberia has lost 90% of its elephants in the last 3 decades. I mean, it is outrageous, and it will only get worse. So we need to begin to place nature at the center of our development, that actually preserving critical ecosystems ensures that we get that fast and tangible and lasting development, that conservation does not work against development, but works in consonance with it.
Well said, Onyeka. Now, Jim, I'm sure you've been listening to that explanation by Onyeka, and it seems that, you know, economic development goes hand in hand with conservation. I'm sure you agree with him.
You know, looking at what is happening in Kenya here, and I agree with my good brother from the other side, you know, conservation is not only conserving trees, you know. And if you look at the trade of poaching in this country where we are, initially we thought that the poachers are people who comes and go.
Yes.
But over times, and I won't say this with practical examples that people have met along the way when you are doing the campaign. There are people like me and you. And if you ask them, why are you killing elephants? You know, they have no idea even why we have these elephants in this country. And people for many years think that the wildlife belongs to the foreigners. And there is a very bad attitude in this country, which I call the perpetual attitude. You know, whenever you talk about wildlife, people see Mzungu, people see the white man, people see people in a van. There is nowhere where a Kenyan, where a local person can feel that I'm related, I am part of the conservation. Why? It is simply because you look at many things, and I've tried asking myself, why is this attitude for many people, including even our members of parliament, that most of them have no even idea why we even need to have the hyenas with us here. So very importantly.
Yes. Now, Vincent, do you think there's lack of sensitization or, you know, education among the public when it comes to wildlife?
Yeah, I think there is lack of that, because especially in our education system, I'm happy at least we are changing the education system. At least we should inculcate the environmental issues in the education system, so that in our children, younger generation, as they grow up, they get to appreciate the values of nature, what the nature gives us in a broader picture as well. Us in Wildlife Direct, we're trying to create that sensitization through, like, for example, our Toto Porini initiative, taking young kids who have never been to the wild parks, an opportunity for them to interact with wild animals such as rhinos, elephants, for them to get to understand these animals also, they exist, and the good things they give us in our in nature and everything.
Yes. Now, Onyeka, Ali, you've talked about the U.S. and a few years back, former U.S. President Barack Obama had some sort of an executive order to fight, you know, wildlife trafficking. And at that time, there was a lot of criticism. There are those who are saying that, you know, there is no corresponding action from the East. Case in point, China, which is the largest consumer of ivory products. Is that the case now?
I think there has been very positive development in the wildlife trade, especially from the demand side. Because don't forget that we not only need to stop the trade, we need to stop the killing. So there is the supply and the demand side. China early this year or late last year committed to make a major ban on domestic sale of ivory in China, and that will go a long way in reducing the supply, the demand, and the funneling of African ivory.
Yes.
Very good news just 2 days ago from the UK government. They are planning to roll out a similar ban on domestic use of ivory with some caveat. We are all calling on the US to take a similar stand. The US is a major recipient of African ivory for trinkets, for so many different things. And if you get this critical momentum around key points like Hong Kong and Singapore and other places, it will go a long way. But we are beginning to see some positive signs. It's not as fast as we would like to see, but it's surely some good signs.
Now, Jim, speaking about countries and borders, a new study finds that 3/4 of African savanna elephants cross country borders, but the treaty that protects them from the illegal ivory trade doesn't account for that. And the research goes ahead and says, in fact, more than half of Africa's elephants live in border regions, where as soon as they cross that arbitrary line, the level of protection they have completely changes. So do you think with this kind of study, there's need to have some sort of a concerted effort across African countries to help in, combating poaching?
Thank you. For the last couple of years, we've seen some countries coming together, like the African Elephant Coalition, bringing so many countries together, about 20-something countries together. They're trying to bring the countries together so that they can be able to have the cross-border programs so that we can be able to bring the Tanzania or the Uganda or Namibia together.
Yes.
And over years, we've seen every country tend to protect their own elephants. And we always say that elephants have no passport. They cross all over. And we see that it is the reason at which elephants are showing us that we cannot protect the Kenyan elephant without considering the Tanzania. And we have these treaties, like we have the Lusaka Agreement, and we also have, like if you go to South Africa, there is SARDEP. And the reason behind these countries coming together is for them to establish mechanism on how they can manage, conserve, and also look for resources. And by and large now, there is now the African Elephant Action Plan, bringing all the 37 states together so that they can be able to look for resources together, instead of Kenya struggling to look for money alone. Because if you look at the part of the Savo, the Kenya side, elephant goes to Mkomanzi in Tanzania. If you look at Mara, Kenya, and Serengeti. So there is a need for, and this was actually a recommendation in the last census, but the last CITES, but one, whereby the countries were told to establish a mechanism, particularly the three countries, the Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, as a source of ivory. We were told to identify an integrated approach on how are we going to end poaching and also mitigate human-wildlife conflict, which is taking a lot of elephant within this region.
Now, Vincent, I'm sure you've been having campaigns and, things to educate people about conservation and the importance of conservation in this continent. Has it been fruitful so far?
Yeah, it has been fruitful. Ever since we launched a flagship campaign, Hands Over Elephants campaign, way back in 2013, we've seen a decline in poaching. As Jim had mentioned, right now we see an increase, especially in Kenya, human-wildlife conflict. Even the other day, on Saturday, we lost a little bull in Amboseli due to human-wildlife conflict. And I think we have, especially in Kenya, we have best laws. The treaties have been signed, but the people who consume, interact with animals down there, mashinani, they have no idea what is there. So I think the government needs to have like friendly policy that include the participation of young people, the communities living around with the so that at least they also get to be part of this conversation. if we want to win this war.
Yes, well said, Vincent. Now, Onyeka, Vincent says treaties are signed, you know, there are deals between these African countries, and it's not necessarily effective on the ground. And I believe there's a meeting that is going to happen in Gaborone, Botswana. What is it all about, and how is it going to help conservation efforts in the continent?
Thank you for raising that. The meeting that is happening in Maun, in Botswana, just south of the Okavango Delta, is a meeting of 12 ministers from 12 countries, members of the Gaborone Declaration for Sustainability in Africa, or GDSA. The GDSA came about in 2012 when progressive African countries met together, just a few African countries, before Paris. And said, regardless of what happened, because everybody was expecting Paris might go the way of Copenhagen, regardless of what happens in Paris, we are committed to sustainable development because we see our enlightened interest in pursuing that sustainable development pathway. And so these countries came together, and in 2014, the government of Botswana asked Conservation International to run the secretariat on behalf of the member countries, and we've been running that. So supporting, providing funding, helping in fundraising. We've raised about $118 million since 2014 for various projects, including in Kenya. So this particular meeting is the 5th anniversary milestone, plus to receive 2 new members, Uganda and Madagascar, who is joining the previous 10, making it 12, and also to look at a new strategic plan up to 2022, which will take into account some of the identified challenges of how do we move the needle in terms of getting massive uptake amongst Africans and not just foreigners regarding conservation, preservation of wildlife, and so on.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Onyeka, you've exhausted everything there. Well said. I think that will serve as your final comment. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Jim, very briefly, moving forward, what needs to be done to make sure that wildlife in Africa get maximum protection?
Very much. If you look at the Kenya here, we only have one organization called Kenya Wildlife Service. And according to the law and establishment, Kenya Wildlife Service is mandated to look at the wildlife of Kenya, irrespective of where they are. But if you look at the statistics, shows that about 70% of the Kenyan wildlife, they're outside the park.
Yes.
So we cannot expect Kenya Wildlife Service, with all the goodwill they have, to manage the wildlife. So we need to cultivate the goodwill, what I would call the citizen leadership, to bring more stakeholders to support conservation. And I think this is the same thing to other African countries. And very importantly, our head of state and our leaders, politicians, we must change this attitude that the wildlife belongs to some groups of people or some group of agencies. Because we have seen what has happened, like a country like Eritrea, a country like Niger. They've lost quite a number of animals, and this is because we have left these to one institution.
Yes.
So it is a call of action to all Africans. If we need to see the remaining 415,000 elephants in Africa for the next 25 years,
yes,
every person in Africa, irrespective of where you are, whether you are in prison, whether you are in school, whether you are an officer, it is a responsibility for everyone.
I'm sure they're listening. Many thanks, Jim Nyamu, for your input. Jim is an elephant research scientist and activist. And then as well as Vincent Ontita, who's an education and outreach manager, Wildlife Direct Kenya, as well as Michael O'Brien Onyeka from Nigeria, is a senior vice president, Africa Field Division at Conservation International. Many thanks all of you for your input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let's now take a look at our images of the day. They come from Angola's Kizomba dance, a sensational couples dance, which was born close to 30 years ago. Since then, it has swept the country and beyond. But a battle for the dancer's true soul is being fought every night on dance floors worldwide. Now, these young Angolas, as you're going to see it shortly, there you go, have fun every weekend. They train in preparation for birthday parties and wedding celebrations in Luanda. Semba, Angola's traditional dance, features prominently, as does Kizomba, a dance descended from the Semba. They're known as Samba, I believe, in Brazil. But Mario, one of the dancers, hopes that Kizomba's booming popularity doesn't lead it to lose its essence. At its heart, Kizomba is a family dance with a technical subtleties, I believe.
The difference between Kizomba and Semba is the rhythm and the melody. With the Semba, the melody is more prominent and the beat is more marked. With the Kizomba, the melody is slower.
Our world needs affection. Here we dance Kizomba and our bodies get close to each other. In Europe and elsewhere, they're missing out on that. When they find out this dance is from Africa, where people entangle themselves, even if they don't know one another, it makes them feel warm, and that's why it works everywhere. Kizomba is sensuality. It's African magic. Unfortunately, people are retaining only certain aspects of Kizomba, but to us, it's our culture. People are trying to make Kizomba something sexy, something erotic. It's ironic because for us it's something very serious. It's our culture and our means of self-expression.
Very interesting there. Now, before we wrap up, there's no way we're going to end the show without the proverb of the day. Take a look. Proverb there from Ghana. And now let's take a look at our Twitter poll tonight. And earlier we did ask you if you think the anti-IBC demos by NASA are effective. We did ask you if you think the anti-IBC demos by NASA are effective. And let me take a look at how it fared out. 57% of you said yes. And 43% of you said no. Let me just go quickly through some of the feedback here. And Issa Herse says, yes, it's imperative to note that NASA want a fair playground, while JP prefers shambolic electoral environment in order to rig out. And then there's Anti-Njoki Dugu says, okay, forget about that one. At Jewel, he says, yes, because Kenya has lost its democracy. So the NASA demo are effectively chasing democracy. And then at Ulam says, I don't think so. Ever since it started, no changes have been made. The only thing they have done is derail the economy. Those are some of your feedback here on that question that we did ask you earlier. Of course, this is a question that we did ask you on our Twitter poll in the program. Now, finally, here is the bottom line tonight. While countries in Africa continue with their quest of achieving economic development, conservation efforts are sometimes left by the wayside, leaving the rich African flora and fauna at risk. A very dangerous trend indeed. What we should know is that the need to have a sustainable economy goes hand in hand with conservation efforts. Conservation is all about climate change mitigation, saving water catchment areas, improvement in domestic tourism. It boosts agricultural economy through pest control efforts. And the list is endless. These are all ways and means of achieving not only a sustainable economy, but a diversified, sustainable economy. There's also need for governments of African countries to make common efforts in saving our environment. When one talks about conservation, what comes to mind is the African wildlife, among them the big five, who have been and still are at the center of tourism attraction. A new study finds that 3/4 of African savanna elephants cross country borders, but the treaty that protects them from the illegal ivory trade doesn't count or account for that. No wonder some 27,000 savanna elephants are killed each year, leading to a 30% decline between 2007 and 2014. Elephants live in border regions where as soon as they cross that arbitrary line, the level of protection they have changes. Poaching groups don't care about national borders. They operate across the continent. Therefore, conservationists need to be more, not less, coordinated transnationally than poaching groups. And that's the bottom line tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. See you tomorrow, same place, same time. Bye-bye for now and enjoy the rest of the night.